There's a silence that only comes after everyone leaves. Not an empty house, but a life that used to be full of people who no longer call. You've noticed the messages that stopped, the names gone dormant, the days that pass without a single person asking how you actually are. You've noticed the cold clarity at 3 in the morning when you realize the crowd you once carried would not carry you across the street. And you've noticed the ache of remembering who you were before you started shrinking yourself to keep them comfortable. They told you being good meant being available. They measured loyalty by how much of yourself you handed over. So you built an identity around being needed. What they never told you is that a self built to be consumed will eventually be consumed. And when there's nothing left to take, the takers leave. That isn't tragedy, that's a system working exactly as designed. The forbidden question is not why they left. It's why you built a life that required them to stay, for you to feel real. You didn't arrive here by accident. Something in you already recognizes that this silence is not punishment, it's an invitation. 2 doors. One returns you to the noise, rebuilding a life spent auditioning for people who were never going to choose you. The other meets the self you've been avoiding, and you discover what Carl Jung understood with terrifying precision. Jung isn't describing the state you're in now. He's describing the state you were in the entire time you were surrounded. The loneliness began the day you learned that what mattered most to you was unwelcome at the table. You laughed at jokes that weren't funny, agreed with opinions you didn't hold, performed a tolerable version of yourself, and called it connection. Now that the performance has ended, you're not lonelier. You're just finally honest about a loneliness that was always there. The culture profits from your dependence. A person at peace alone cannot be sold to, manipulated, or managed. The fear of silence was installed in you, not born in you. And when the scaffolding of other people falls, 4 things remain. Only 4. Everything else was borrowed. Most people outsource these 4 to others and then wonder why they feel hollow when those others are gone. By the end, you'll know what those 4 are, why you were trained to abandon them, and how to reclaim them so completely that no absence, no betrayal, no departure will ever destabilize you again. The 4th one is the one almost no one ever finds. And I'm going to hand it to you before this ends. If these ideas resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more top-tier content. Also, drop a "only 4" in the comments so I know you're ready. Let's dive in. Here is what nobody explained to you. The people who left were not the building, they were the scaffolding. And scaffolding is designed to come down. That's not a flaw, that's its function. You were taught to confuse the two because a person who mistakes scaffolding for structure will spend their entire life terrified of losing what was always temporary. And terrified people are compliant people. Terrified people give and give and give, hoping that if they just pour enough of themselves into the scaffolding, it will become permanent. It will not. It cannot. That is not what scaffolding is for. Consider the specific texture of what you're experiencing. It's not just that people left. It's that their leaving has revealed how much of your daily thinking was organized around them. You catch yourself composing messages you won't send. You catch yourself rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You catch yourself measuring your days by whether certain names appeared on your screen. Your mind is still running software, written for an audience that no longer exists. And every time you catch yourself doing it, there's a small, sharp shame. You think this means you're weak. It doesn't. It means you're waking up. The software is still running, but you're now watching it run. That gap between the running and the watching is the exact place where sovereignty begins. Jung called this the confrontation with the self. Not the small self, the performing self, the self that learned to be palatable, the self with a capital letter, the totality, the one who was there before you were taught who to be. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The reason the departure of others feels like death is because you had, without realizing it, borrowed your sense of existing from their perception of you. You existed because they saw you. You mattered because they responded. You were real because they confirmed you, and now the mirror has been taken away and you're standing in the dark and you're afraid that if no one is looking, maybe you were never really there. You were. You are. But the version of you that required their eyes to be real must now be composted so that something older, quieter, and infinitely more durable can rise in its place. The first of the four things is beginning to reveal itself already, though you don't yet have a name for it. Sit with that. We're not naming it yet. We're preparing you to actually receive it. Because a name given too early is a name that gets stored and forgotten. A name earned is a name that reorganizes your life. The first thing that remains when everyone is gone is your own attention. And I know how that sounds. It sounds too simple. It sounds like something you already have. You don't. You have never had it. From the moment you were old enough to notice a face looking at you, your attention was captured, redirected, trained, and monetized. You learned to point your attention at what others wanted you to point it at. Your teachers, your parents, your peers, your partners, your feeds. Every one of them, without malice necessarily, took a piece of your attention and taught it to face outward. And you became so accustomed to attention flowing outward that when there is no one to point it at, you experience its return as a kind of suffocation. Here is the hyper-specific version. You sit down in the quiet. You try to just be. Within 90 seconds, your hand reaches for your phone. Not because you want anything specific on the phone, because the sensation of attention with nowhere to land is physically intolerable to a nervous system trained for 40 years to always be looking at someone else. That reach is not a habit, it is a withdrawal symptom. You are in withdrawal from the drug of being observed and from the reciprocal drug of observing others so you don't have to observe yourself. The sovereign mind understands that attention is the first and most precious possession. Not time, not money, attention, because time without attention is just duration. Money without attention is just numbers. Attention is the substance from which every experience of your life is actually built. And you have been giving it away for free to people, platforms, and pressures that returned nothing of equal value. The people who used you did not steal your energy. They accepted the attention you would not keep for yourself. This is the reframe that changes everything. They didn't take, you handed. And you handed because keeping felt unbearable. It felt unbearable because no one ever taught you that your own attention, turned inward, is not a lonely thing. It is the beginning of a life. Notice what just happened. A moment ago, you thought this was about them leaving. Now you're beginning to see it was never about them at all. It was about a resource you were bleeding out for so long that their departure just made the wound visible. That's the first reversal. Hold it, because the second one is coming, and it will cut deeper. The second thing that remains is your body. Not the body as an object of judgment, not the body as a project to be optimized, the body as the only continuous witness of your entire life. Every person who left you took their memories of you with them. Your body did not. Your body remembers every moment you swallowed a word you should have spoken. Your body remembers every time you smiled through a slight because you were afraid to be difficult. Your body remembers the specific tension you carry in your shoulders from years of bracing for disappointment. Your body has been keeping a ledger that no one else has read, and it has been waiting patiently for you to become quiet enough to read it yourself. This is where most people flinch, and I want you to notice the flinch, because when I say your body has been keeping score, part of you does not want to look at the score. Part of you would prefer to keep the ledger closed. That part of you is the part that was trained to believe your own signals were inconvenient. You learned to override hunger to be polite. You learned to override exhaustion to be productive. You learned to override the gut warning that a person was not safe because being wrong about them was easier than being alone. And every override was a small betrayal, a tiny act of siding with the outside world against your own instrument. The people who took advantage of you were only able to do so because you had already agreed, long before they arrived, that your body's warnings did not count. Jung wrote about the wisdom of the body as something modern people have systematically severed themselves from. He observed that the neuroses of the modern individual are, in part, the accumulated cost of ignoring what the organism already knows. You have been living from the neck up, running your life on a committee of internalized voices, most of which were never yours to begin with. Your father's voice, your mother's voice, the voice of a teacher who shamed you at 11, the voice of a partner who taught you that your needs were too much. That committee has been running your life, and your body has been trying to interrupt the meeting for decades. The strategic detachment you are being invited into is not detachment from your body. It is detachment from the committee. It is the reclamation of the one instrument that has been loyal to you since before you had language. When you sit in the silence now, notice what your body does when you stop performing for absent people. Notice the exhale that comes when you finally stop rehearsing the message you will not send. Notice the loosening in your jaw when you let go of the imaginary argument. Your body is not the enemy of your peace. Your body is where your peace has been waiting in storage for the person you are becoming to arrive and claim it. That's the second possession. 2 more to go, and the third one will explain something about the people who left that you have suspected but never allowed yourself to say out loud. Before we name the third possession, we have to stop and ask a question that most content will not ask you, because most content is designed to comfort you, not to change you. The question is this: why did you tolerate it for as long as you did? Not why did they do it? Why did you stay? Why did you keep pouring into vessels that never filled? Why did you keep explaining yourself to people who had already decided not to understand? Why did you keep showing up for the ones who never showed up for you? If you're honest, and I mean the specific kind of honest that only happens when no one is watching, you will notice that a part of you knew. A part of you knew for years. A part of you saw the patterns and named them in the privacy of your own mind, and then talked yourself out of what you saw because the alternative, the aloneness, felt worse than the exploitation. That is not a flaw in your character. That is the exact architecture of the trap. You were not weak. You were operating a nervous system that had been trained to interpret solitude as danger and connection at any cost as safety. You were not naive. You were loyal to a version of love that was defined for you before you had the capacity to consent to the definition. And now, in this silence, you are being given something you have never had before, the chance to redefine it. Not intellectually, not as a slogan, as a lived structure, as the operating system of the rest of your life. Most people cannot follow the next part. Most people, when they encounter what I'm about to say, retreat back into the story that the people who left were villains and they were victims. That story is comfortable, and it is also a cage. The people who left were not villains, not most of them. They were, like you, operating from patterns they did not choose. Some of them used you because you allowed use. Some of them left because you had trained them to see you as endlessly available. And when you finally began to protect yourself, you became unrecognizable to a dynamic built on your erasure. Their departure was not a verdict on your worth. It was a confession of the terms they had signed up for. And when the terms changed, they left. That is not betrayal. That is data. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still willing to look at this honestly, is the confirmation. Not everyone can hear this without shutting down. Most people prefer the story where they were purely wronged. You are being asked to accept a harder and more powerful story, that you were a participant, that your participation was not consent, it was conditioning, and that the very moment you recognize the difference between conditioning and consent is the moment the conditioning loses its grip. This is the second reversal. What looked like their leaving was, at a deeper layer, your beginning. The third thing that remains is your capacity to make meaning. And this is where almost everyone gets robbed without ever noticing the robbery. Because the meaning of your life has, up to this point, been outsourced. What did you do for a living? What did people call you? What roles were you performing? Wife, husband, friend, provider, reliable one, funny one, fixer. Every one of those meanings was granted to you by other people, and every one of them can be and has been revoked. When the roles collapse, most people experience an existential vertigo so intense they will do almost anything to fill the vacuum. They will jump into a new relationship before the ink is dry on the last one. They will take on projects they do not care about just to have somewhere to point their attention. They will construct new scaffolding at a frantic pace, and they will call it moving on. It is not moving on. It is running. The one who does not run discovers something, that the vacuum is not empty. The vacuum is where meaning gets made rather than granted. Jung described individuation as the lifelong process of becoming the specific individual you were always going to be if the world had not gotten to you first. And individuation is not possible while the scaffolding is up. It requires the collapse. It requires exactly the silence you are sitting in right now. The people leaving was not the end of your meaning. It was the removal of the borrowed meanings so that a native meaning could finally have room to form. Here is the specific texture of what happens when you claim this third possession. You wake up one morning and you notice that you did something small the day before, something no one saw, something no one would ever praise you for, and you notice that you did it well anyway. You made your coffee with care. You wrote something no one will read. You took a walk and you actually saw the walk instead of narrating it in your head to an imaginary audience. And something in you registers quietly that the doing was enough, that the witness inside you was enough, that you had, for the first time in memory, done something for the sole audience of yourself and found it complete. That moment is not small. That moment is the founding document of a sovereign life. That is the moment meaning stops being something you are given and becomes something you generate. And once you have generated it once, you cannot unknow how. The people who used you needed you to believe that meaning came from them, from their approval, their attention, their presence. That was the leash. When you generate meaning from within, the leash dissolves. Not because you have severed the connection, because the connection was never real in the first place. It was a story, and you were the one telling it. You can tell a different story now, and you will. Now, the tactical layer, because everything you've heard so far becomes vapor if it does not translate into how you live starting tomorrow morning. Strategic detachment is not a mood, it is an architecture, and it is built through specific practices that will feel unnatural at first because they contradict every reflex you have been trained to obey. The first practice is the pause. When someone reaches out to you now, especially the ones who went silent when you had nothing left to give and reappear now that you seem more settled, you will feel the old reflex to respond immediately. Do not. The pause is not punishment. The pause is where your sovereignty lives. In the pause, you ask yourself a question the old you never asked. What does responding cost me, and what does it return? Not what does it cost them. What does it cost me? If the ledger does not balance in your favor over time, the answer is not to respond faster next time. The answer is to notice that you have been subsidizing a relationship that never intended to reciprocate. The second practice is the withdrawal of explanation. You will feel the urge to justify your new distance, to send the long message explaining why you have changed, to help them understand. Resist this. Explanation is the mechanism by which the old dynamic reasserts itself. The moment you explain, you have re-entered the courtroom in which you are always the defendant. Sovereign minds do not defend. They observe, they decide, and they act. The people who need an explanation for your peace were never going to accept the explanation anyway. Save your breath. Silence is not rudeness. Silence is the correct response to a question that was designed to trap you. The third practice is the audit of your own attention. Once a week, sit down and notice where your attention traveled. Not your time, your attention. Whose face appeared in your mind uninvited? Whose imagined judgment shaped your choices? Whose absence you were still reaching toward? Notice without shame, and then make one small decision to redirect one unit of that attention inward, toward the body, toward the meaning-making you are learning to do, toward the silent inheritance you are only beginning to read. Over time, this audit becomes automatic, and the sovereign mind you are constructing becomes the default state, rather than the achievement, and you will notice something happening in the world around you. This is the future you are walking into, so let me describe it precisely. You stop initiating with people who never initiate, and you notice, over weeks, that some of them vanish and some of them suddenly reach for you with an intensity they never showed before. You respond to fewer things, and you notice that the things you do respond to become sharper, cleaner, more real. You stop over-explaining, and you notice that your presence in a room begins to carry a weight it did not carry before. People sense a person who is not asking for anything, and a person who is not asking for anything is paradoxically the person everyone quietly wants near them. You did not become colder, you became clearer. And clarity, in a world of anxious performers, reads as a form of authority that cannot be faked. Which brings us to the fourth thing, the one almost no one ever finds. And to name it properly, we have to return to something I said at the very beginning when I told you the scaffolding was never the building. Do you remember? I said it and moved past it, and part of you registered it and part of you filed it away. Now, we open the file. If the scaffolding is not the building, what is the building? And this is the question that separates the ones who merely survive the silence from the ones who are transformed by it. The building is not a thing you have. The building is a relationship. It is the relationship between the you who observes and the you who is observed, between the witness and the life being witnessed. Jung called it, in different moments, the transcendent function, the relationship between the ego and the self. Simpler language, there is a you who is watching you read the reactions of a room. There is a you who is watching you flinch when a certain name appears. There is a you who is watching you feel the old ache and reach for the phone. That watcher has been there the entire time. That watcher was there when you were 7. That watcher was there when you were 17. That watcher will be there when you are 80. The watcher does not age. The watcher does not need. The watcher does not leave. The fourth thing that remains when everyone is gone is the relationship between you and the watcher. And here is why almost no one finds it. Because the watcher only becomes accessible when the noise stops, when the scaffolding falls, when you finally sit in the specific silence you are sitting in right now. The people who left were not your loss. They were the condition of the discovery. They had to go for you to meet the one who does not go. That is not a comfort. That is a structural fact about the human psyche, and Jung spent his life mapping it. Most people never make the discovery because they refill the noise too quickly. They cannot tolerate the interval in which the watcher becomes audible. You are being given, right now, the interval. Do not waste it. Your attention, your body, your capacity to make meaning, and your relationship with the watcher. These are the only 4 things that were ever yours. Everything else was borrowed and had to be returned. And the strange, quiet miracle of this moment is that you can now feel, at least dimly, that these 4 are enough. That a life built on these 4 cannot be destabilized by any absence. That a person who possesses these 4 cannot be manipulated, cannot be abandoned in any meaningful sense, cannot be reduced by anyone's departure. Because the departure of others no longer subtracts from a self that was never built from their presence. Imagine yourself 6 months from now. You wake up before the phone. You sit for a moment in the quiet, and it no longer feels like an accusation. It feels like ownership. Someone from the old life reaches out, and you feel the old reflex rise and then settle, and you respond, or you do not, and either way you are not disturbed. You walk through the day, and you notice that people look at you slightly differently now, and you cannot always name why, but you can feel it, a kind of gravity you did not have before. You are not performing for anyone, and the ones who are still around you are not around you because you are performing. They are around you because you have become the kind of person people are drawn to precisely because you no longer need them to stay. You are, for the first time in your life, unexploitable, not because you have become hard, because you have become whole. If this reached the part of you that has been waiting a long time to hear it, subscribe. Not because I asked, because you understand now that you are engaged in a project, the project of becoming sovereign, and this is one of the few places where that project is taken seriously. What you have just heard is one layer. There are deeper layers. There is the work of shadow integration, the work of decoding the specific ways your conditioning still runs beneath your awareness, the work of building the internal architecture that no absence can shake. This is the room where that work happens. Stay in the room. And whatever you do, don't stop now. The on-screen video matters more than you think. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. I'll see you there. See what others miss. Know what others fear. Become who others can't.